Hey everybody, it's Kat, and I want to welcome you to this episode of Backstory Sessions. I'm joined today by my co-host Willie. Hey Willie,
Hey, Kat, how are you?
doing great. How are you?
I'm all right for a Friday.
Well, Friday's leading us to Monday, which Memorial Day,
Yes.
and we have a very special guest with us today that's going to be, perfect. Um, in many ways for the backstory and also for Memorial Day and music that is being released for that. Um, you know, it's often that we get to talk to songwriters, but not as often that we get someone whose songs I think are like really grounded in emotion and memory and even for Memorial Day. So this is a very special episode. And I'm going to go ahead and introduce our guest and jump right into the story.
All right, let's go.
All right, today we have with us Michael Peterson. And many of the listeners, you may know him from a chart-topping hit, From Here to Eternity. But there's some exciting new music that's being digitally released for the first time this Memorial Day. And it's with Down on the Farm, and we are the music. So today we have with us Michael Peterson. Michael, welcome, and we're so excited to have you as our guest today.
Well, thank you so much for having me, and I wish you a very mindful Memorial Day weekend.
Thank you so much. What I guess as Memorial Day, we can start with that. Has that always been to you, you know, uh, a holiday that was mindful and that had a great impact on you?
You know, my senior year of high school, uh, 2 weeks before I graduated, my adopted father took his life,
Oh,
and his funeral was the day before Memorial Day, and so for me, Memorial Day since that time, since I was 17, has been a time of reflection and thoughtfulness because I loved my dad with all my heart, and he was also a veteran. So that was probably the first recollection I have of Memorial Day being something that meant a lot more to me, because I understood, even though my father's death was self-inflicted, it wasn't, a military person who gave their life. It still was his passing, and he was a veteran, and it really caused Memorial Day to have more of a deep emotional impact on me. And as I grew up from then, into my country music career, where I had the privilege of beginning to do a lot of work with veterans and military families and deployed service members, of course, I was in many situations in Iraq or Afghanistan where, people that I had spoken to 2 hours before, I found out had been killed in a roadside bombing or an attack. So these people that that you've met, that you've worked with. So Memorial Day starts to really mean a lot more personal things.
well, in 17, that's really a young age, I think, to start having that yeah, like Memorial Day meaning something so deeply to you.
Yeah.
Um, were you already writing songs at that point?
No, I wasn't, but on the heels of my, burying my dad, and my birth father had been murdered when I was 15. So there was a
Wow.
couple of years of real trauma. And on the heels of that, um, I just had to express myself somehow, and music had always been a place of comfort for me. So I started in the wake of that in my freshman year in college to begin to write songs.
And were the reflections of these deaths, were they subject matters that you started with?
Yeah, I mean, I don't, I was uncomfortable with telling my story specifically, even in song form. But I will say that the deep emotions that it stirred in me of sadness, of loss, of wishing for something else, those things showed up veiled, if you will, in songs that weren't specifically about those deaths, but they were about loss, they were about sadness, they were about trying to learn to deal with trauma. My early songs were really informed and empowered emotionally by those losses.
So, did it help you like therapy? Was it like therapy for you to be able to express yourself in that way?
Yeah, well, thank you for asking that. And at the time, I was so in it that I don't remember feeling as though it was therapy to me. But when I reflect on it backwards from this juncture of my life, I can see that, you know, when you can express your grief somehow in ways that I don't quite still understand, it can help to lighten your burden. And when you do have the courage to express your grief, one of the byproducts of that often is that other people say to you, "Wow, I know how you feel. I went through the same thing. Thank you for sharing that." And there's something that happens over a period of time, or at least happened to me, where I began to see that the sharing of my experiences and other people saying thank you for sharing your experience, there was something in that that felt redemptive and began to bring some healing into my life. Um, because something that was previously just a terrible thing that happened in my life, actually I began to see some good in it, in that it not good that the things happened, but something good was coming from the sharing of the things that happened to me, that was bringing healing to other people and to myself. So, over time, that begins to really bring a healing effect for you. And I like what Willie Nelson said in one of his songs. He said, these kinds of losses are not something we ever get over, but they are something we get through. And, it's not something you get over, but it's something you get through. There's a lot of truth to that.
So, it takes a lot of vulnerability to share those kinds of feelings through any type of writing, but then especially writing that's going to be performed for others. So, who did you share those first songs with?
Well, I was a student and a student athlete at Pacific Lutheran University from 1977 through 1981. And they had an on campus coffee house. And one night a week, they had an open mic. And so I guess probably sometime in my junior year, because I was too nervous to get up and play for people before that. But in my junior year, I started to sign up for the open mic on campus. And then at the end of my senior year, I saw a bill that was posted in one of the campus lounges for a group of singers. They were looking to audition a group of singers to go on a missionary trip for a year to Peru, Ecuador, and Bolivia. And it was through the Lutheran Church organization called Lutheran Youth Encounter. And so, I don't know, I just felt attracted to that. And so I auditioned for that and was chosen to be on this music team. And if then the war broke out in Central America, and so we ended up not doing the missionary trip. But for that year, I had a chance to, sing in churches all over the country as we were out kind of preparing to go on this missionary trip. And I think that was a place where I really began to kind of find my footing, sharing this music with people because people would want to hear your story. So part of my story involved, you know, how God made a difference for me in my life, helping me to get past the trauma and get through it.
So, what were you majoring in at college?
Yeah, my major was psychology. and my minor was elementary physical education. And my plan was to become a teacher and a coach, a football coach. That was what I had planned to do.
And I'm guessing something changed because
Yeah,
here you are. So,
yeah.
what did change and what was the catalyst for that?
Well, when I got out of college, I was about 2 years out of college. Uh, my best friend called me up one day and said that his cousin had married this guy who was starting a ministry of athletes who would go into high schools all over the country and perform feats of strength, kind of, the kind of thing that would get kids' attention. Everything from, tearing phone books in half with your bare hands, bending steel bars in your teeth, breaking baseball bats over your leg, breaking bricks with your head, karate stuff. So he said, "Hey, you want to join this team?" And I was, at that time, I was, just working odd jobs, just out of college, trying to figure out what I was going to do. And I was probably 24 years old, and it sounded like fun. So I said yes, and I moved to Spokane, Washington, and I joined this team. And in very short order, as part of this team, I began to find myself, doing school assemblies 5 days a week, sometimes four assemblies a day, then a Wednesday night church service, then a Sunday night church service, a Sunday morning church service, sometimes two or three. And so over the course of those 2 years, I don't know, I've never sat down and done the math on it, but there were hundreds and hundreds of opportunities to begin to understand how to communicate with an audience, how to fit music into it, how to share a story that might make people laugh, that might cause people to feel something that would be of benefit to their life. And so over those 2 years, I found that it was something that I really enjoyed, and it was something I felt a calling to. So while I was doing that, I would say to the churches, they wanted me to come in and be a speaker. But I would say to them, hey, I also sing. Would you mind if I sing while I'm there? So they would all say, yes, that's fine, no problem. And so I thought, well, I should make a record so that I have something to give to people after I sing. And the only person I knew in the music business was a teammate of mine from college football. And he worked at a little record company in Seattle. So I called him up one day and said, "Do you know anything about making records?" And he said, "Yeah, I do." So I raised some money, and we went and made a record together. And about 2 years after that, he by chance met the pop star Denise Williams. I don't know if your listeners will remember her from songs like "Let's Hear It for the Boy" or
Yeah.
"Too Much, Too Little, Too Late" with Johnny Mathis. So they met and they started dating. And while they were dating, she said to him, "Hey, what do you know about the music business?" And he said, "Well, I produced a record once." And she's like, "You produced a record? Well, who can I hear the record?" Well, it was the record of me. And
Oh
so
my
he
goodness.
gave her the album. She loved it. And at that point, she had just had "Let's Hear It for the Boy" was the biggest hit song in the world. And she was starting a new production company, and they were looking for artists and writers to manage and to sign. So after she heard my album, she said to him, "We ought to sign Michael Peterson to a deal." And so that was my first publishing, management, and record deal was with Denise Williams. And my first songs that were recorded for another artist were songs that I wrote with her. I actually had the follow-up single to "Let's Hear It for the Boy," a song called He Loves Me Not," which was on the pop and R&B chart. So I got my start really writing pop and R&B music and gospel music for Denise Williams. And then, as things go, that had a season that was alive. And then I found myself wondering what I was going to do next. And I decided that I really liked speaking to young people. So instead of becoming a teacher and a coach, I thought maybe I can be a guy who travels around and speaks to young people. So for a period of 12, 13, maybe 14 years, that's what I did. I was on the road 150 days a year, 200 days a year, speaking at youth camps and high schools and churches all over the country and literally all over the world. Um, and making custom albums that I would make and sell at my shows. And in the middle of that, a friend of mine said, you know, it's great that you're writing pop and R&B and gospel music. He said, but he said, I look at you in your cowboy boots and your cowboy hat, and I think, how come Michael Peterson's not doing country music? He said, you should go to Nashville. So I started visiting Nashville. And on one of my first trips, a guy that I met said, no one's going to take you seriously if you don't come here more often. So in short order, I made a commitment to visit Nashville a week a month. And I did that for 2.5 years. And during that time, I met a lot of people, and my understanding of the business grew, and my understanding of country music grew, and my songwriting grew. And eventually that led to me signing a publishing deal at Warner Chappell Music, which led to me signing a record deal with Warner Brothers Records. And here came my first single, Drink, Swear, Steal, and Lie. And of course, it rocketed to the top of the chart. It was number one on CMT. It was number three on Billboard. It was number one on Gavin and R&R. So, there I was. I found myself kind of step by step, working my way towards a destination that I didn't quite know what it was going to be. But I always hoped that it would be about music. And in the end, I'm now 66, and I've had the privilege of really never having had to have another job for the last 40 years. I've been able to make a living doing music.
So it sounds like the path was kind of meant for you, and
Yeah.
that you just followed along and it guided you to this, different path than you had expected.
Yeah.
Are your songs like that too? Do they seem to come from somewhere and you just like grasp that idea and it takes its own path? Or, are you one that like has a certain formula for writing a song and you write every day and that kind of thing?
Well, I think it's a combination of what you just said. And that's a great question, and thank you for asking it. When you are first starting anything in life, anything that you want to learn, there's a big, huge learning curve. And so for me as a songwriter, I spent 20 years writing songs and reading every book I could get my hand on about songwriting and watching every TV show I could do and playing open mics and meeting other writers and talking and for pretty much 20 years, the only people that liked my songs were my friends, and they had to like them or the beer stayed in the refrigerator. you know, so but along the way, I learned how to write songs, and I learned that if you want to be a professional songwriter, it really is helpful if you develop habits, certain habits that can nurture your songwriting. And one of those habits is always keeping your eyes and your ears open for things that people say that are interesting, that catch your attention. And I learned about the value of a hook, and I learned the value of a great melody. And I had a lot of co-writers that mentored me, and I learned things from them, and many of them were very, very successful songwriters. So I just learned a lot along the way. And I think it's fair to say that, for many of those years of my life, I was an apprentice songwriter. And somewhere along the journey, I became a journeyman songwriter, somebody that understands what makes things work and understands also that it's not just a matter of mechanics. It's a matter of feeling something deeply and finding a way to express it that will become universal, that will be something that millions of people are likely to feel, and not just me. Um, so I just 45, maybe 50 years of songwriting, I just have developed a habit of being about being a songwriter. And it's one of those things that has never wavered in my adult life. I just have never lost my passion for it. I'm more passionate about it now probably than I've ever been. And I love sitting down to write a song and having it turn out in a way that makes you smile and say, wow, that's exactly what I hoped for. And it's even more than I hoped for. Sometimes you just say, wow, where did that come from? Sometimes they show up and you write them in a day, and sometimes you live with an idea for 10 years before you finally go, oh, I know what to do with that. So it's pretty dynamic in that regard, and it really is a journey.
That's quite interesting. Willie, what are you thinking of this story so far? It's fascinating.
It certainly is. And I think you've already answered one of the questions that I have. Uh, who inspired you to take this journey? I think you've pretty much covered that, but if you want to expound on it any.
Well, thank you for asking that. And my grandmother had a huge impact on me. I'll tell you two brief anecdotes. One is when I was about 15, my mom decided that the records I was listening to were not the kind of music she wanted in the house. So I came home one day, all my records were broken. And
Oh my
my
gosh.
yeah, my mom was really into church, and she didn't want Black Sabbath records in the house, and I get that now. But at the time, it was hard for me to swallow. But my grandmother, she called me one day and she said, I hear your mom didn't like your music. And I said, yeah. She said, well, why don't you just bring your records over here from now on? So I waited till I had some lawnmower money and I bought some new albums and I showed up at my grandma's house. And I remember walking into her little apartment and she had a record player was in the closet because it was a tiny little apartment, and the speakers were outside of the closet and the record player was in the closet. And I remember I walked in and she said, well, let's hear what your mom is so upset about. So I pulled out an album by Led Zeppelin. It was Led Zeppelin 4, and I put it on the turntable, and I put the needle on, and I looked over at my grandma and I thought to myself, oh, is it too loud? And then I actually said that out loud, and she got up from her couch and she walked over into the closet. And I thought, oh, it's too loud. She's going to turn it down. No, but she didn't. She cranked it way up, and and it began a journey for me with my grandmother, where I would come over to her house and I'd play a record, and then she'd play a record. She'd put on Ella Fitzgerald, or she'd put on Patsy Cline, or she'd put
Mm,
on Duke Ellington or Nat King Cole, and and we just had this special time that we shared together, where I'd play a song, she'd play a song, and we'd spend hours together trading songs. And it was in the context of that one day that I said to her I wanted to make it in the music business someday. And she said something to me that really changed my life. She said to me, how long do you think it'll take you to be a success? And I didn't know how to answer the question. She said, do you think you'll be successful? I didn't know.
mm,
Made me nervous when she asked me. But then she said something that I never forgot. She said, how old will you be if you never try? How old will you be in 10 years if you never try? And I thought, wow, so I have to try, right? Because I don't want to be 10 years later saying, wow, I should have tried. And so my grandma was a great inspiration to me. She introduced me to great music. And at a moment that was very pivotal for me, she said, hey, 10 years from now, you don't want to look back and say, I wish I would have. So that was really pivotal for me. So that was another person that was really a great inspiration to me.
wow. Great story.
That is a fascinating story. The broken records and all of it. That's very
Yeah.
interesting. Um, so what were some of the other records that you were listening to? I, I know
Oh,
you,
at that time, I loved Jim Croce, James Taylor, Gordon Lightfoot, all the great singer-songwriters. And I also loved classic rock. Well, now it's classic rock, but at the time it was just modern rock. It was Led Zeppelin, it was Rush, it was REO Speedwagon. I mean, I just loved music. I loved Barry Manilow. I just loved great songs. And sometimes people say, "Ooh, how could you like Barry Manilow?" And what I say is, "How could you not like Barry Manilow?" I mean, these songs are great,
right?
And so to me, I just always loved great songs and great music, and music that would stir my heart, make me feel things. Um, I don't know. I look back now and I think it wasn't until just a few years ago that I realized actually what I've really been in my life is I've been a writer. And I don't know why it took me so long to really embrace that, but I had my first publishing deal when I was 23 years old. And ever since then, I've almost consistently been somebody writing songs for somebody. And then I ended up writing some books. And I realized I was a kid who had dyslexia in school. I couldn't read very well. I had a really difficult time processing information. And I just think it's really interesting that I ended up having a career as a writer when I was a kid who could hardly read. And I just think that's a beautiful story about redemption and overcoming. and how you become something that you're not when you're a kid and nobody can see it in you, but suddenly over the years it emerges and you just look back with wonder and you say, wow, how did that happen? You know?
So, have you always been open to believing that you can do whatever it is that you want to do?
No, I don't think I always was. You know, I was like a lot of kids. You have a lot of questions, you have a lot of doubts. And when you grow up in a family where there's a lot of trauma, the world feels very uncertain, you know, and I think the profundity of latching on to things that are inspirational was amplified for me because of the trauma that I'd been through. You know, if I hadn't gone through those traumatic experiences, I might not have gravitated as much towards trying to find some things that would be inspiring to me. And I had some people in my life, coaches, teachers, pastors, who said things to me and spoke into my life in ways that I really needed. You know, I mean, I remember one time a friend of mine said, um, that only people that are broken go to church. And I remember thinking that he meant that as a criticism. And I remember thinking to myself, yeah, the church is filled with broken people because they're people that recognize that they need help. And I recognized in my life that I needed encouragement, I needed help. And so I looked for help and I looked for encouragement. Authors like Og Mandino just profoundly impacted my life. His book, The Greatest Secret in the World, has been a cornerstone for me. Authors, many authors like that just speak into your life. I just felt drawn to those things because I needed encouragement.
So, did your grandmother get to see your success?
Um, she died when I was 30. I didn't get to Nashville until I was 36.
Ah,
So, but I have a feeling that she saw it anyway.
Hmm.
yeah.
Yes.
Seems
You
like
know.
she saw it like before it manifested even.
Well,
Yeah,
so
Um,
she was that person who didn't care how long my hair was, how short my shorts were. You know, when you're a kid, you have a lot of adults giving you advice. You need to cut your hair. You need to clean your room. You need to, and it's funny because that's, that guidance that you need. But her place, like when I was 17 and my dad took his life, I felt sometimes like a blind person in a dark room and didn't know where the light switch was. Yeah, I felt pretty lost, and my grandma made a place for me where I felt safe. And she helped me find the light switch, and my life was forever changed because of her.
did that relationship make its way into a song eventually?
Oh, yeah, I got a bunch of songs about my grandma. One of them is a song called Play. And it was that story I just told you where she said, how old will you be in 10 years if you don't? She said to me, so, hey, look, if you love to play music, then go play. Play if they like you, play if they don't. Play if they pay you, play if they don't. Go play. Like this is your heart's desire, go do it.
Wow. She sounds like a great person. You know,
Yeah.
how lucky to have someone like that in your
Yeah.
life.
Priceless, really, for me. Like,
Yeah.
where would I have been? I mean, my mom had three boys, no husband, and my stepdad came into her life and ended up adopting all of us boys. I sometimes think, wow, and he always loved me like I was his own. Like, what kind of man marries a woman with three kids and treats them like his own? Like, that changed my life. Like, where would I have been without him? So you look back on these things and you just, for me anyway, all I can do is be grateful.
Well, it's Willie, again, certainly fascinating. I mean, I just keep coming back to that word, but um it's a very compelling story.
it is, and I can sort of relate to him with the grandmother. That's kind of how mine was, a safe place. Uh, so what I've read over your your life story and what's out there. Uh, what do you think about being compared to say I'm going to say a modern day Bob Hope?
Well, I remember years ago, somebody said to me one day, they asked me a question. They said, "Do you know what a star is?" Of course, I was in the music business at that time, and I thought, is this a metaphor or do they mean a literal star? Like, what do they mean? And I said, well, I know you're getting at something, so instead of answering the question, I'd like to know more, like, what are you getting at? And that person took me out on the balcony and they pointed up in the sky and they said, "You see that star up there?" And I said, "Yeah." And they said, "A star is something that other people observe, but the star never calls itself a star."
Mhm.
And I remember thinking, wow, that's a deep thought, and and so you know that's has stayed with me through the years. And when there's been special moments in my life when I've been compared to people that I think are stars, like Bob Hope, clearly one of the biggest stars of the last 2 centuries, maybe ever in the world. Um, so to have been the recipient of the Hope Spirit of Hope Award for you know just pouring my heart out to try to encourage service members who were deployed in Iraq and Afghanistan. Um, that was an honor. It was a privilege. It's not something I earned. It's something I received because a group of people stood back and saw the work I was doing, and they thought it was special. And what can you do except humbly receive it and be grateful that other people appreciate your efforts.
Well, that's very profound. I'm going to
Yes.
give some thought to that question about the star. That's going to play in my mind long after we're finished with this.
Yeah, that's hadn't
Very.
thought of that.
Um, so I know our time, like always, you could
Yeah,
talk
like
forever.
it's
But
another
then
fascinating, as you put it,
yes.
interview. I
Well,
could put
have
some.
me back on another time. I'd love to come back and be with you. You guys are so wonderful. Your questions are so
We would love to have
thoughtful.
you back.
Well,
Yes.
the thing is, you do a lot of interviews in this world. You do as well as I have, and it's not often that I have an interview like this. Most of the time, people just want to talk about the music, and I get that, and I understand that. But I think what you're doing is really unique and special, and I really think it's been a privilege for me to be able to share my heart with you today. So thank you for having me.
Well, we love storytelling, and
Yes,
I think where the stories come from is always very interesting to me because everybody has their own path, and the way that they
and
get to where they are is just always, I've just
and
always
everybody
appreciated that.
everybody has their own unique story.
Yes, and everybody's story matters to them, and their life matters. So that's why it's worthwhile hearing.
Well, we can't leave there without talking about the music too, because,
Okay.
um,
Right.
for Memorial Day, we are
Yeah.
veterans, that seems very meaningful. What inspired that project?
So I started after 9/11 to offer myself to do whatever I could to encourage troops, and that led to a journey about I don't know how many years, 2001 to 2012, I guess. So all of those years that I was traveling around the world singing for deployed service members, many of whom were in the war fronts, and I began to notice that a certain group of songs were the songs that this audience was responding to the most deeply. And so it occurred to me one day that what if I could put that group of songs that they seem to respond to the most onto an album. And maybe that album could be there when I couldn't be there, and it would be an encouragement to them around the world. And so now that's finally going to happen because this album pretty much was unavailable anywhere except my shows for a while. And now that I've got this new record deal with Star Vista, they're going to spread this album, this We Are Veterans album, to make it available on all digital streaming platforms around the world. So, my hope still is that if you're a veteran or a military family member or you're an active duty service member and you're hearing this interview, that you'll take time to check out on Spotify the We Are Veterans album, because these songs were songs that really have been sort of tried and true through the years of sharing space in deployed in areas of deployment, in places in Iraq and Afghanistan, small forward operating bases. Um, and these songs were all chosen because they really were. I was told by the service members, "Wow, that song really meant a lot to me." So this Memorial Day weekend, there's a song on that album that's our first single off that album, a song called "The Old Army Hat." And I don't know if they've talked to you about that song in particular, but it's my first single off of this new release, and it's a song that tells a true story of a World War II veteran's journey from coming home from the war all the way through visiting the World War II Memorial, where he has an auspicious meeting with a young boy whose father has been in the service. And an amazing story happens around this army hat. And it's just one of those great songs that, especially this Memorial Day, will be deeply meaningful to your listeners.
Well, and I know we have a lot of military families that listen, and so I can't wait to get the feedback after, they've heard this. Um, so I guess our last question, the songs, the projects that you do, is there one particular song that you would suggest, besides this one that you've mentioned, that everyone listen to from this album?
Um, with the 250th sesquicentennial for the United States coming up July 4th, um, there's a song on that album called Wave On Old Glory, Wave On. And it's a particularly inspiring song about Old Glory, about the American flag. And every time I hear it, every time I sing it, it chokes me up. And I've been singing it for a long time, and it still has that impact on me. So check out Wave On Old Glory, Wave On, and play it at your 4th of July celebrations this year.
I was gonna say, are you performing it any place on the 4th?
You know what? I'm not. I'm actually going to be with my wife. My wife is a retired U.S. Army colonel who was injured at the Pentagon on 9/11 and has recovered from her post-traumatic stress and has spent the rest of her time since she got out of the military helping other people who experienced trauma. And so 4th of July is kind of a special time for us as a couple to be together and reflect. Because
Yeah.
most of the year she's out encouraging other people, and I'm right there with her. We're doing that year round. So the 4th of July is kind of a time for us to hunker down and just be together.
Well, we definitely have to have you come back. There's so many more questions. Like
For
almost
sure.
every answer, leads my mind into all these other things I want to know about you and the
Oh,
writing. So, we'll definitely invite you back. And
Yeah.
um, thank you so much for
Thank
sharing
you.
today.
thank you. What a privilege. And I hope you have a great weekend.
You as
You
well.
too.
Okay. Bye.
Bye bye.